Greetings, gentlemen and ladies. Welcome to a series of lectures on motor function of the nervous system. We have built to this level to be able to understand how the subcortical structures like the basal ganglia and related nuclei like the thalamus, as well as the cerebellum in the posterior aspects of the brain, how they contribute through the brainstem to motor control. So quickly, we look at the motor function or the role of the basal ganglia in motor function, which is focusing basically on motor learning and pattern selection. And by pattern selection and motor learning, we mean, for example, if for example today I pick the keys and throw them for the first time in the air, I'll be able to struggle. But the next time I do it, I don't even need to look at where the keys are, because now the next movement will be better and things like that. So that is motor learning. So that is recorded within the physiology of the muscle as well as the nervous system through basal ganglia function and the cerebellum. Other than that, pattern selection, for example, is which groups of muscles are going to be stimulated to contract and which ones will be stimulated or inhibited to relax, so that, for example, we can complete the physiological function of the movement. If I need to move my upper limb and I need to stretch it, that is extension, then it will mean that my triceps need to contract while the biceps are relaxing. So that is selection. Which groups of muscles are going to be stimulated or contracted and which one should relax for this physiological movement function to be executed. So this is one of the things that we focus on the motor function or the role of basal ganglia in motor function. So the basal ganglia is part of the extrapyramidal system, and it cooperates with cerebral cortex in terms of execution of movement. And it is important, as we have put it, that it is directly involved in motor learning and motor function selection. There are several nuclei that form part of the the basal ganglia, and these include the striatum, which is made up of the globus pallidus, the putamen rather, and the chordates. Then we have the globus pallidus, which is divided into globus pallidus external, globus pallidus internal. The internal portion of the globus pallidus is the portion that is medial, while the external portion is the lateral portion of the globus pallidus. Then we have the nucleus that is below the thalamus, and therefore it is referred to as the subthalamic nucleus. And then we have the black substance that is involved or part of the basal ganglia, and it's called substantia nigra, literally implying black substance. Then we have these nuclei coordinating with the cerebral cortex via the thalamus. So basal ganglia, quickly also, before I forget, is to mention that normally the terminologies relating to ganglia is that ganglia is a group of cell bodies outside the central nervous system. Therefore, these nuclei being in the central nervous system, it's a misnomer for them to be referred to as ganglia. So latest literature, in fact, calls these nuclei the basal nuclei and not basal ganglia. So this is just in this slide an illustration. If we did a coronal section of the brain, what we'll be able to see is that on either side of the cerebrum or the brain, we are going to have cortical structures and subcortical structures. So the subcortical structures, what you'll be able to see is that in below this cerebral cortex will have on either side a collection of basal ganglia nuclei, beginning with the chordates, going into the putamen, and then we have the globus pallidus medialis and externalis, and then we have the subthalamic nucleus, the nucleus, and the black substance down there. So this is very crucial to understand. So they are interconnected by groups of neurons, and so they communicate to initiate movement and loop back into the cerebral cortex to initiate and produce those planned movement activities in the pyramidal tracts. So these pyramidal tracts coordinate or are stimulated or inhibited by the pyramidal, basal nuclei pathways. So these basal nuclei pathways are divided into two. There's the direct pathway and the indirect pathway. The direct pathway is a stimulatory and the indirect pathway is inhibitory, such that these pathways of the basal ganglia are directly involved in stimulating a group of neurons while inhibiting a particular group of neurons at the same time. So let's look at that. So the input into the basal ganglia is a cortical input where we have stimulation of the chordates and the putamen here, and there is a group of neurons that extend into the globus pallidus internal directly, and then the globus pallidus internal projections project to the thalamus, and then the thalamus projects to the cerebral cortex to stimulate the pyramidal tracts. So this loop is called the direct pathway because there is direct stimulation of the striatum, direct stimulating the globus pallidus internal. This is in comparison to the indirect pathway where the cortical neurons stimulate the striatal neurons that are shorter. These shorter ones, they end in the globus pallidus externalis or external, which connect to the subthalamic nucleus. So the pallidothalamo neurons that project to the subthalamic nucleus, these ones, they now project from the subthalamus now to the globus pallidus external. Therefore, this pathway takes an indirect route. Instead of directly stimulating the globus pallidus internal, there is a passage into the subthalamus, then back into the globus pallidus internal. Therefore, here there is, in the direct pathway, there is involvement of the subthalamic nucleus and then projecting all the way back to the cerebral cortex. Therefore, what we see is that the direct pathway is stimulating the pyramidal pathways, while the indirect pathways will be inhibiting the some pyramidal pathways. So this will lead to a group of muscles being contracted by electrical stimulation, while another group of muscles inhibited because there is no impulses stimulating them to be able to contract. The other pathway that is crucial here are the projections of the neurons from the substantia nigra. These are called nigrostriatal, meaning from the substantia nigra to the striatum. So these nigrostriatal neurons are very important. Why? Because they produce and secrete dopamine. Dopamine, which binds to D1 receptors and stimulates the direct pathway, while dopamine, the same one, will be inhibitory on the indirect pathway, meaning the dopamine further enhances the inhibitory pathway, the inhibitory activity of indirect pathway, and further enhances the stimulatory activity of the direct pathway. Therefore, what we see is that the substantia nigra is important in ensuring that the function of the basal ganglia is enhanced. Therefore, if we have damage to the substantia nigra, or the neurons undergo demyelination because of infection or any autoimmune diseases or stroke, then we are likely to have poor delivery or secretion of dopamine, and dopamine transmission is affected. Therefore, we'll have a condition called Parkinson's disease, where motion and movement initiation and selection becomes problematic. So pay attention to those two pathways and their importance. Just a few highlights on the cerebellum. That the cerebellum is important. It's located in the posterior aspect of the brain, just below the occipital lobe of the cerebrum, and so it is important in coordination and balance, as well as correction of motor activity, so that there is refining. So smooth motor coordination and processing of extensive sensory input is a function of the cerebellum, and this is through the processing of information about balance, position of the body in space, and how that planned movement will be executed based on where the position of the body is, as well as how extended or distended the different muscles of the body are. So it rapidly assesses body position and corrects planned movements. It will help in controlling posture equilibrium and also how forceful the movements are going to be executed. This is through the operation of reciprocal connection to follow up what motor activity is being executed. So in terms of anatomy of the cerebellum, grossly we will say that the cerebellum is structured just like the cerebrum, except the shapes differ. So it will also have the cerebellar cortex, as well as the deeper nuclei that are involved in different aspects of coordination of movement. So there is integration of motor function in relation to sensory input. So what we see is that sensory feedback from spinal cord, the middle ear, as well as the cerebral cortex is integrated with structures like the basal ganglia as well as the cerebellum. This is crucial so that this will allow real-time adjustments of motor outputs. What movement should be produced, how precise these movements should be in relation to the position of the body in space. The cerebellum, therefore, and basal ganglia are very, very useful to ensure that this is produced by using this information to modulate movement and execute those movements. So in terms of summary, all that we can say is that motor control involves a hierarchy of systems and parallel systems that include the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex that is important for planning, the basal ganglia that is important for selection, and then the coordination through cerebellar function. These are through the tracts that pyramidal and extrapyramidal, and the integration with sensory activity is crucial in smoothing, balancing, and coordinating these motor functions. All the best. Thank you.